To our modern sensibilities, Newtonian physics seem a universe apart from pagan ritual magic. Yet, an episode in the history of art and technology illustrates how they merged in the early modern era. In the twilight of the 16th century, the magical worldview of the Renaissance overlapped with the dawning of the scientific revolution, producing a unique combination of sculpture, mechanics, and occult ritual. Moving statues that seemed alive in the Renaissance revived techniques from ancient Alexandria. Classical texts, first unearthed in the 15th century, describe two versions of how this was accomplished. One was through magic, to summon and bind a spirit to a man-made vessel. The other relied on ancient Greek insight into mechanical physics, with devices that manipulated air, water, heat, and other natural forces. Both methods were employed at the same time in the creation of moving statues for one Italian Renaissance villa. In late Renaissance Florence, neither ancient mechanics nor magic were new discoveries. Classical devices survived in the West through the 6th century, but they eventually fell into obscurity until medieval crusaders returned with Arab and Byzantine technology. Magic also was practiced in Europe through the Middle Ages to create talking heads that in theory could predict the future, as well as to facilitate communications with angels and demons. The unique development at the end of the 16th century was the simultaneous application of both occult and mechanical means to animate statues at the Villa Pratolino. At the peak of the high Mannerist style in Florence, these virtuoso works blurred distinctions between art, magic, and engineering. Pratolino's statues employed magical and mechanical techniques invented by ancient Greek and Egyptian temples to bring cult statues to life. However, in the centuries to come, Pratolino's engineering far overshadowed its magic. While 17th century courts eagerly adopted its devices, the occult no longer had a place in the rational West. It took a large team of artists and engineers to build Pratolino. The entire complex and its wonders are best described, however, as collaborations between the chief architect Bernardo Buontalenti and his patron Francesco I de' Medici. A recluse, uninterested in affairs of state, Francesco I's true passion was alchemy. When he succeeded his father and later became Grand Duke of Tuscany, Francesco I secured the resources to design and build his own fantasy world. Expense was no object, and the Medici library contained the ancient manuscripts that inspired both magical and mechanical automata. Inside the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence today is Francesco I's most enduring and emblematic work. The tiny studiolo functioned as an intimate Wunderkammer, enclosing a personal, alchemical microcosm. Pratolino was an extension of this private universe on a far grander scale. While refined porcelain and wrought crystal techniques are generally the recognized achievements of Francesco's alchemical pursuits, the hydraulic and mechanical physics of his lost automata are seldom considered. In two of the most recent studies of early modern automata, Pratolino is never mentioned. This oversight is likely due to the near total demolition of the villa in the 1820s. Where the villa once stood, today stands a 19th century monument marking the location. None of the automata survived. We have a limited idea of what they looked like from a handful of drawings and engravings dated circa 1600, including a series by Giovanni Guerra presently conserved in Vienna at the Albertina Museum. Eyewitness accounts tell us how the automata moved and the mythological stories they acted out. We can look behind the scenes thanks to a document from shortly after Pratolino's construction. Francesco de' Vieri's 1587 description identifies which automata owed their animation to occult means, and which ones employed engineering from antiquity and the medieval Islamic world. While magical methods were already on the decline by the beginning of the 17th century, the hydraulic and pneumatic principles went on to become the bedrock of modern classical mechanics. The following study charts the transmission of both magical and mechanical methods employed at Pratolino, from their common origin in ancient Alexandria through their rediscovery in the Italian Renaissance. Especially the element of magic and the occult distinguished this villa from its contemporaries. Pratolino certainly wasn't the first to showcase automata and hydraulic works. The Montefeltro court of Urbino was a center for learning about classical mechanics, and it may have influenced the elaborate water gardens at the Villa Lanti in Bagnaia and the Villa d'Este in Tivoli. Yet, however spectacular their displays were, these sites still lacked the occult aura that permeated Pratolino even centuries after its construction. Pratolino's occult devices loomed large in the villa's fascination less than a century before its destruction in the 1742 description of the royal villa by Bernardo Sansone Scrilli. However, Scrilli offers no explanation for what exactly made them occult. Rather, he reveals a sprawling network of pipes, gears, and wheels underneath the entire site, powered by the force of rushing water. Instead, the only explanation of Pratolino's occult statues is found in De Vieri's Renaissance account. According to its text, statues were brought to life by a technique Aristotle described in the 4th century BC. Aristotle wrote that the motion of mercury atoms mimicked the motion of a living soul. At least two of Pratolino's automata possess this talismanic living silver inside of them. Mercury, inside either marble or a transparent stone, supposedly animated a Galatea automaton, which belonged to a choreographed scene. A Triton appeared first, raised a conch shell to his lips and sounded a note, causing the rocks to part. A golden shell carriage, drawn by dolphins spouting water, then appeared carrying Galatea with two nymphs. Mercury was also placed inside of a Pan automaton in another grotto. According to an eyewitness, the Pan automaton stood up, moved its head and eyes, brought reed pipes to its lips to play a tune, and sat down again in a sorrowful attitude as his companion Syrinx gradually metamorphosed into reeds. Ruins of this grotto are still on the original site today. The technique of animating statues known to Aristotle is reflected in Greek occult tradition. When esoteric Greek manuscripts arrived in 15th century Florence, Cosimo de' Medici was so fascinated by them that he ordered Marsilio Ficino to translate them immediately. However, Hermetic writings were already known to early church philosophers. Many thought they prefigured Christianity, although its God-making passage was condemned. Ficino's translation popularized these works and flooded Renaissance culture with what was believed to be wisdom from ancientest Egypt. In the modern era, historians have dated these texts to Gnostic writers in the 1st century CE, but the Renaissance accepted them as authentic works of Hermes Trismegistus, a sacred composite of the Greek god Hermes, the Egyptian god Thoth, and in some sources an antediluvian or Babylonian prophet priest, credited with teaching the ancient Egyptians how to make living idols. Hermes Trismegistus also taught Aesculapius, the healer of Greek mythology, who brought medicine, star magic, and other wisdom from Egypt to the Greco-Roman world. In the Hermetic works, the Aesculapius text contained these instructions for theurgy, or the art of binding spirit to a man-made vessel. This is essentially the god-making technique, credited with bringing ancient world statues to life, with divinely propitiating herbs, stones, and aromatics. Millennia later, this ancient method resurfaced at Pratolino in the instances of its Galatea and Pan automata. If Greek Hermeticism introduced the idea of theurgy to the Renaissance, Arabian star magic provided its specifics. Muslim Spain was Europe's closest point of contact throughout the Middle Ages. In particular, Gerbert of Aurillac, who became Pope Sylvester at the turn of the 11th century, transmitted to the West much of what he learned in Spain, including the abacus and the 9 Arabic numerals we use today. However, another story circulated that he stole a book from a Muslim philosopher and constructed a talking head with the power of prophecy. That book may have been the Picatrix or Pomander, which was a compendium of the materials and rituals pleasing to individual celestial spirits. Arabian magical philosophy influenced many writers of the early Renaissance, especially Pico della Mirandola and Marsilio Ficino. With his work on obtaining life from the heavens, Ficino bequeathed the how-to manual of astrological talismans to the West. These talismans drew on the Neoplatonic philosophy of Plotinus and others, and they purported to derive power from the all, or the world soul, instead of from pagan star demons. This distinction rehabilitated the Renaissance Magus's image investing it with a new dignity and reassuring his Christian readers. Later Renaissance writers on the occult were less comforting. Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's occult philosophy addresses theurgy, star magic, and the demonology that Ficino assiduously avoided. Although Agrippa repeats how pagan priests bound spirits to man-made vessels, he also cites ancient mechanical works, like the flying wooden pigeons Barcatas. Furthermore, Agrippa departs from a strictly magical approach when he states that any magician aspiring to work wonders must be skilled in mathematics, mechanics, and natural philosophy. By the beginning of the 17th century, serious belief that spirits could be summoned and imprisoned in statues had evaporated. Tommaso Campanello wrote that statues could be brought to life only by means of locomotions and weights and pulleys, or by using a vacuum, as in the pneumatic or hydraulic apparatuses. All of the forces just described by Campanella in the 17th century had their origins in ancient Alexandria. Ctesibius and Hieron of Alexandria's many inventions directly shaped hydraulic devices for over 2,000 years. Some of Ctesibius's works from the 3rd century BC were preserved in the Roman writings of Vitruvius. The rediscovery of the latter by Poggio Bracciolini had a tremendous impact on Renaissance art and architecture. Hieronic devices survived in the text of the Pneumatica, which came to Italy along with many other Greek manuscripts after the fall of Constantinople. The Italian translation of this text was dedicated to Pratolino's architect, Bernardo Buontalenti. Water and air, combined with heat, floats, and pulleys, made ancient idols seem alive, speaking, crying, or even lactating, and scenes to come to life when a burnt offering was placed on an altar. Ropes of animal intestines and grass were used in the temples to make their statues' movements more lifelike. These displays were the jealously guarded secrets of Alexandria's numerous and lucrative temples. But over time, this illusionistic technology spread beyond them. In the 2nd century, Irenaeus wrote about a Gnostic miracle worker who exhibited a device that made a small cup appear to fill a larger one to overflowing. When paganism and its temples were outlawed at the close of the 4th century, the East absorbed its fragments of knowledge. Baghdad's House of Wisdom inherited what was left of the Library of Alexandria. Under Harun al-Rashid in the 9th century, refreshing water gardens and mechanical birds of gold and silver entertained the court. In Constantinople, the Byzantine Emperor Theophilus also had a golden tree with singing mechanical birds and an automated throne with roaring lions and moving beasts. In the late medieval Muslim world, al-Jazari invented hundreds of devices. What distinguished his inventions from their classical predecessors was a concern for human comfort, exemplified by al-Jazari's robotic servant that offered its master a towel or a drink. Centuries later, for Francesco Primo at Pratolino, the idea of non-human servants certainly appealed. In the villa's innermost grotto, a marble page poured water from a pitcher in one hand while offering a towel with the other. Water also filled 8 place settings cut in a granite table, and food appeared from a wheel connected to a secret kitchen. Pratolino's mechanical servants replaced human hands and eyes, ensuring a level of privacy otherwise unheard of for a ruler of the time. More Eastern innovations filtered into Europe that ultimately appeared at Pratolino. In Muslim Sicily, a water garden impressed one crusader so much that he built his own version when he returned home to France. The result was the castle and park of Esdan, with its mechanical toys and aquatic illusions, which eventually passed to the House of Burgundy. In the 15th century, Esdan's automata were reconstructed under Duke Philip the Good. Hydraulic technology that had previously made possible ornamental water jets became trick jets in the pavement designed for soaking visitors. Although Esdan was demolished less than a generation before Pratolino, its mischievous spirit continued there, with trick water jets concealed in pavement, within benches, under stairs, and in statues like the Cupid, which rotated and squirted water at unsuspecting guests. Its original grotto is one of the few structures left intact. In late medieval Italy, Visconti gardens at Pavia and Milan featured mechanical birds. In the 15th century, Giovanni Fontana designed flying birds, as well as a fire-breathing witch, and devils that could move their facial features, arms, and wings. By drawing the workings of his demons, Fontana was making a statement that mechanics, and not magic talismans, moved his devices. Around a century later, the Italian clockmaker Turiano made some of today's oldest surviving automata. A wind-up monk that's been the subject of a recent study by Elizabeth King, and a mechanical lute player made for Charles V, kept today in Vienna's Kunsthistorische Museum. The Pratolino automata, however, are directly indebted to the Italian Renaissance's master inventor, Leonardo da Vinci, who also made good use of Greek and Arabic engineering principles. Take, for instance, a water suction device illustrated in Al-Jazari's works. A virtually identical design appears in the works of the 15th century Italian engineer Teccola, and later in the Sienese engineer Francesco di Giorgio Martini's. Leonardo da Vinci was familiar with Martini's work, evidenced by his handwritten notes in the margins of one of Martini's treatises. Leonardo da Vinci also possessed an extremely rare work on hydraulics by Philo of Byzantium, whose works were largely unknown in the West even through the 20th century. We know that da Vinci designed and executed programmable robots during his lifetime, including a walking lion for the King of France, a night automaton for Ludovico Sforza in Milan, and a programmable cart, likely for a Medici patron. However, many of his designs that never left the page were brought to life at Pratolino by Buontalenti and others, making Leonardo da Vinci, in a sense, the uncredited genius behind many of its wonders. The enormous Atlantic Codex preserves da Vinci's sketches for a garden of wonders that never materialized. Instead, more than 50 years after his death, some of his drawings may have inspired John Bologna's personified mountain, the Apennine, Europe's first colossal sculpture since antiquity. More than just a statue, it also concealed a grotto with fountains and automata built into the giant's belly. Mechanical birds, animals, and musical instruments in Leonardo's drawings were witnessed at Pratolino by Michel de Montaigne. He saw the water-powered instruments play a variety of pieces, and statues move alone and in groups. Doors open by themselves, and mechanical animals appear to jump into, swim around, and drink from a body of water. Finally, another invention from the ancient world that reappeared in the drawings of Al-Jazari and Leonardo da Vinci is the clepsydra, or water clock. Da Vinci never built his building-sized water clock with a rotating bell striker. However, the same mechanism was employed later at Pratolino to power an animated scene. Under the villa, in the same ruined grotto as the occult Pan, an automaton of winged fame beat her wings and sounded a trumpet in one hand. At her feet, a peasant filled a cup of water and passed it to a dragon, that lowered its head and appeared to drink, the last action being accomplished by a simple siphon. Although none of Pratolino's automata still exist, they nevertheless had a profound influence on both European culture of the following century and the development of what we call fluid dynamics and classical mechanics. The occult statues of Pan and Galatea may have been the early modern era's first and last attempts at ancient Egyptian god-making, but Pratolino's mechanical automata, like the famed tableau, the musical instruments and moving animals, the page that poured water, the cupid that shot water, as well as Pratolino's trick water jets, became sought-after innovations at virtually every European court in the following century. Hydraulic engineers with first-hand knowledge of Pratolino found immediate employment, like Tommaso Francini in France at Saint-Germain-en-Laye, Fontainebleau, and the Luxembourg Gardens for Henry IV and Maria de' Medici, or Giovanni Gargioli for Rudolph II in Prague. With the diffusion of these devices came a necessary understanding of their operating principles. Perhaps no other art or object history tells the story of the transition from the magical to the mechanical more succinctly than Pratolino's automata. The pioneering, inquisitive character of the alchemist Medici Prince Francesco rediscovered the secrets of ancient Alexandria's cult statues and applied them to the production of moving statues for his villa. However, although automata by this time were generally acknowledged to be demonstrations of human ingenuity, and no longer talking heads inhabited by a demon or spirit, there is nevertheless a commonality to the origins of both the magical and the mechanical methods. For the Greeks, Pneuma meant breath, wind, spirit, and air, and these forces were originally considered interchangeably. For the Hellenistic doctors, Erasistratus and Herophilus, pneuma was the fluid that coursed through the body's nerves, bringing motion and perception with it. By learning to control that air spirit with fire, water, and other forces, man did indeed give life to inanimate objects in ancient Alexandria, medieval Baghdad, Byzantine Constantinople, and finally in the West from the time of the Crusades. Wherever this knowledge was preserved, automata and hydraulic devices flowered. But Pratolino's automata provide a material marker for the decline of an animistic universe operated by magic and the rise of a mathematical universe operated by mechanics.